Before the poverty, before the rejection letters, before the word failure became personal, there was a girl who lived almost entirely inside her imagination. Joanne Rowling didn't grow up dreaming of fame. She grew up needing escape. Stories weren't ambition, they were shelter. As a child, she was quiet, observant, the kind of kid who noticed emotional shifts in a room before anyone spoke. She wrote early, not because someone told her to, but because writing gave shape to thoughts that felt too large to hold silently. Life around her wasn't cruel, but it wasn't stable either. There were changes, tensions, moments that taught her nothing lasts the way you want it to. So she created worlds that did. Characters became companions, plots became structure. Fiction offered something reality didn't: continuity. Even then, she didn't think of herself as special. She didn't imagine destiny. She simply knew one thing: when life felt overwhelming, stories made it bearable. As she grew older, that inner world stayed vivid, but the outside world grew louder. School turned into responsibility, responsibility turned into expectation, and expectations don't care what you love. Joanne was intelligent, capable, but she wasn't ambitious in the conventional sense. She didn't crave power. She didn't chase status. She wanted meaning. That made her incompatible with many paths presented to her. She studied. She graduated. She took jobs that paid the bills: teaching, office work. Nothing terrible, nothing fulfilling. Each role felt temporary, like she was borrowing someone else's life. At night, she still wrote. Not consistently, not professionally, privately, because writing wasn't a career plan. It was the only place where she felt aligned. But alignment doesn't protect you from adulthood. Reality presses in slowly: rent, food, time. And the older she became, the more distant her childhood certainty felt. She began to wonder if that imaginative girl had been naive, if loving stories was indulgent, if practicality meant letting go of what once felt essential. She didn't give up writing, but she didn't trust it either. It lived on the margins, something done when life allowed it, and life rarely did. This is important, because her collapse didn't come from chasing a dream irresponsibly. It came from postponing it, from living cautiously, from trying to be reasonable, from telling herself she would write seriously later. Later is a fragile promise. Joanne carried quiet dissatisfaction, not dramatic misery, just the dull ache of misalignment. She was surviving, but not inhabiting her life. And when a person lives that way long enough, they become vulnerable. Vulnerable to bad choices, to misplaced hope, to believing the wrong escape will finally fix everything. She didn't know it yet, but the foundation was already cracking. Not because she lacked talent, but because she lacked ground. Stories were her refuge, but refuge alone doesn't sustain you. Eventually, she would need more than imagination to survive what was coming. Pause here, because this is the calm before everything changes. The moment when nothing is broken, yet nothing is secure. And the mind that once felt like a sanctuary will soon become a battleground. Adulthood rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive with a warning. It settles in gradually, one responsibility at a time, one compromise after another. For Joanne Rowling, this stage of life wasn't tragic. It was disappointing. And disappointment, when prolonged, can be more dangerous than pain. She did what sensible people do. She finished school. She took work that sounded respectable. She tried to be practical: teaching, administrative roles, routine employment. On paper, nothing was wrong, but inside, something was missing. Each job demanded energy but returned very little meaning. She wasn't incompetent. She wasn't failing. She was misaligned. That kind of misalignment doesn't scream. It drains, day by day. She watched coworkers settle into their roles, build trajectories, accept routines. She tried to mirror that acceptance, tried to tell herself this was adulthood. This was maturity. But the effort felt unnatural, like wearing clothes that never quite fit. Writing remained in the background, not as a pursuit, as a reminder of something she once trusted more than practicality. And that reminder became heavier over time, because every year that passed made the distance feel more permanent. She began doubting her younger self. Maybe imagination was childish. Maybe stories were escapism. Maybe she needed to let go. That doubt wasn't loud. It was persuasive. It sounded like wisdom. And wisdom, when misapplied, can suffocate. Joanne started feeling tired in ways sleep didn't fix. Emotionally spent, mentally thin. The world felt transactional. Effort in, paycheck out. no residue of purpose. She wasn't depressed yet, but she was emptying. That emptiness made her vulnerable to the idea of escape, not through recklessness, through change. A new place, a new relationship, a new beginning. When she met someone who represented that possibility, it felt like momentum. Not love as certainty, but love as movement. The chance to leave the life that felt too small, to start over somewhere else. She didn't ignore red flags, she minimized them. Because hope, when starved long enough, accepts substitutes. She imagined a future where writing could return, where life would finally align, where she wouldn't feel like she was borrowing someone else's existence. So she made a decision, not impulsively, earnestly. She left what she knew for what she hoped. This matters because her coming collapse wasn't born from recklessness. It was born from longing, from the belief that changing context could heal internal fracture. That belief is common and often wrong. Joanne didn't run away from responsibility. She ran toward possibility. But possibility, without stability, is fragile. And the further she moved from familiar ground, the more exposed she became. The dream hadn't shattered yet, but it was thinning. The distance between expectation and reality was growing, quietly, relentlessly. Pause here, because this is the moment where hope still feels reasonable, where the decision to leap has not yet revealed its cost. From here, the story moves into love, escape, and the hope that breaks instead of saving. Love doesn't always arrive as romance. Sometimes it arrives as relief. For Joanne, this relationship felt like an exit door, a way out of stagnation, a way forward from emotional fatigue. She didn't mistake it for perfection. She mistook it for alignment. Someone who understood her sensitivity. Someone who didn't dismiss her imagination. Someone who seemed to offer a shared future. So she followed that future, across borders, across expectations, into a life that looked promising from afar. She moved to Portugal, a new country, a new language, a new beginning. At first, change felt intoxicating. Different streets, different rhythms, different possibilities. She taught English to support herself, wrote when she could, believed she had chosen courage over comfort. But reality doesn't adjust to hope. It reveals itself slowly. The relationship changed tone, not violently, gradually. Support turned conditional. Affection turned unpredictable. Control began to replace care. Joanne found herself negotiating instead of expressing, explaining instead of being understood. She tried to compensate. If she became quieter, maybe things would stabilize. If she tried harder, maybe tension would dissolve. But silence doesn't fix imbalance, it conceals it. Arguments increased, not explosive, exhausting. Conversations that circled without resolution, promises that thinned with repetition. And then came isolation. Being far from home magnifies everything. There were no familiar voices nearby, no safety net, no easy exit. She was no longer just unhappy, she was cornered. When their daughter was born, hope returned briefly. Motherhood often does that. A sense of purpose, a reason to endure, but pressure intensified. Financial stress, emotional strain, an unstable environment. Instead of partnership, she felt supervision. Instead of safety, she felt scrutiny. Eventually, the relationship collapsed. Not with closure, with urgency. She left with her child, left without savings, without a plan, without certainty. Returned to the UK as a single mother. This wasn't the failure she imagined as a child. This was adult failure. Complex, messy, humiliating. She carried a baby in a sense of defeat. Back home, the world had not paused for her return. She was broke. She relied on government assistance, benefits, housing support, words that carry quiet shame when pride is still intact. She lived in a small apartment in Edinburgh, cold rooms, secondhand furniture. Some days she avoided turning on the heat. Not because she enjoyed hardship, because she calculated survival. Depression followed, not dramatic sadness, functional despair. The kind that lets you care for a child while abandoning yourself. She described this period later as the lowest point of her life, not because she lacked food, but because she lacked hope. She felt she had failed at every adult role, partner, professional, provider. The only thing she hadn't failed at was loving her daughter, and that love kept her moving, barely. Here's the important truth. She didn't believe success was coming. She didn't trust the process. She didn't visualize triumph. She endured. That distinction matters, because endurance doesn't require optimism. It only requires refusal to stop. Writing returned during this time, not as ambition, as relief. She wrote in cafes because the apartment felt too heavy. She wrote while her daughter slept because those hours were quiet. She wrote not to succeed but to breathe, on scraps of time, on borrowed energy, on belief she no longer trusted. She wasn't chasing publication. She was preserving herself. Pause. This is the moment where the story usually gets romanticized. But don't romanticize it. This was not resilience with confidence. This was survival without certainty. From here, the manuscript begins, not as destiny, but as defiance. There is a particular kind of silence that only appears after collapse, not the calm kind, the empty kind. Joanne woke each morning already exhausted, not from effort, from anticipation, anticipation of bills, of uncertainty, of days that offered no reassurance. Her world had shrunk. A small apartment, a stroller, a schedule dictated by naps and necessities. She was invisible, no career, no status, no one asking what she planned next. She didn't introduce herself as a writer. That word felt undeserved. She was surviving on welfare, government assistance meant to keep people afloat, not proud. She accepted it with gratitude and quiet humiliation. Depression deepened. She later described it not as sadness, but as numbness. A belief that the future had already closed. Some nights, dark thoughts crept in, thoughts she rarely spoke about, thoughts that frightened her precisely because they felt logical. She sought help, medical help, counseling, slow steps back from the edge, and then writing. Not because she believed in herself, because it was the only place where she still felt coherent. She took her daughter to cafes not for atmosphere, but for warmth. The heat was free. The presence of people made loneliness tolerable. She positioned the stroller nearby, ordered the cheapest drink, opened her notebook, and she wrote. Not with urgency, with patience. The story had been forming for years. A boy, an ordinary boy, a hidden world, a place where misfits mattered. Magic, yes, but disciplined magic. Rules, consequences, a universe where identity was discovered, not inherited. This mattered, because Joanne wasn't escaping reality. She was reconstructing it. She wasn't imagining power. She was imagining belonging. Each page gave structure to days that felt formless. Each paragraph offered control where life offered none. She wrote slowly, painfully, often rewriting the same sentence until it felt precise. She wasn't prolific. She was careful, because when everything else feels fragile, precision becomes safety. Years passed, not months, years. The manuscript grew while her circumstances barely improved. She finished it without celebration. There was no audience, no validation, just relief. Then came submission. Agents, publishers, rejection letters, polite, dismissive, some encouraging, but still no. She kept them, not as trophies, as proof she had tried. Each rejection carried the same implication. Market risk, too long. Children's fantasy wasn't profitable. She understood the logic. She did not accept the conclusion. But she also didn't argue. She adjusted. She revised. She sent it again. Her expectations were minimal. She hoped for one thing only, not success. Permission. Permission to keep writing. Pause here, because this is the most misunderstood phase. People assume belief carried her. It didn't. Habit did. Discipline did. Quiet stubbornness did. She didn't believe it would work. She believed stopping would be worse. And that belief, that refusal, is what kept the pages turning. From here, something improbable happens. Not a miracle, a margin, a small yes from someone willing to take a risk. By the time the manuscript reached Bloomsbury, it was no longer fresh. Not to Joanne, not to the industry. It had already traveled through envelopes, through desks, through polite refusals. Some letters praised the writing, others focused on risk. Children's fantasy was uncertain, too long, too quiet, too expensive to print. This matters, because rejection wasn't cruel, it was rational. Then the manuscript landed on one desk. Barry Cunningham, an editor who didn't see certainty, but possibility. He read the opening chapter, not with excitement, with curiosity. And curiosity in publishing is rare. He took it home, not to analyze, to test. He gave it to his 8-year-old daughter. She began reading. She didn't stop. She asked for the next chapter. That request changed everything. Not because it proved market dominance, but because it proved engagement. A child wanted to continue. Bloomsbury made an offer. Small, careful. The advance was modest, around £1,500, enough to cover a few months of rent, not enough to transform a life. They suggested a pen name, initials, J.K. Rowling, because boys might hesitate to read a fantasy written by a woman. She agreed. not as compromise, as pragmatism. The book was published in 1997, a limited print run, quiet release, no launch spectacle, no guarantees. Joanne did not quit welfare immediately. There was no dramatic exit. Success did not arrive fully formed. But something shifted. The book found readers, slowly. Teachers noticed. Children recommended to friends. Libraries reordered copies. Word moved faster than marketing. Then awards. Small at first, then translations, then interest from the United States. The numbers grew. But Joanne's identity lagged behind. She didn't trust momentum. After years of disappointment, good news felt temporary. She waited for reversal, but it didn't come. Instead, the story expanded. Sequels were requested. The world widened. What began as survival writing became responsibility. She now had readers, expectations, a voice that reached further than she ever imagined. Pause, because this is where many stories end, with vindication. But hers didn't end there. Because success doesn't erase memory, it coexists with it. And Joanne carried every cold cafe, every rejection letter, every night of doubt into the future she built. From here, the story moves into meaning, what she did with success, and why the struggle never left her voice. When success finally arrived, it didn't feel triumphant, it felt unreal. Joanne watched her life change from the outside. Interviews, book tours, public curiosity. People spoke about her as if she had just appeared. An overnight success. She smiled politely. But inside, she carried a timeline no headline mentioned. Years of obscurity, years of financial anxiety, years of emotional collapse. Money came, more than she ever expected. But money didn't rewrite memory. It didn't erase the muscle memory of scarcity. She still calculated purchases, still noticed heating costs, still remembered the weight of asking for help. Fame arrived faster than comfort. Suddenly everyone wanted her story, but most of them wanted the ending, not the middle. They asked about inspiration. They rarely asked about despair. She spoke honestly when she could, about depression, about failure, about how close she came to giving up. Not to dramatize, to clarify, because success didn't save her. Writing did. Discipline did. Staying alive long enough to finish the work did. She continued writing the series not because it was lucrative, but because it was already true to her. The story had rules. It had integrity. She refused to rush it, refused to dilute it. Each book carried the same care as the first one written in cafes. As the series grew, so did her responsibility. She used her resources deliberately, supporting causes tied to poverty, single parents, mental health, not performatively, personally, because she remembered what it felt like to be unseen. She gave away large portions of her wealth, not to prove generosity, to maintain grounding. She once said that rock bottom became her foundation, that losing everything that wasn't essential forced her to focus on what was, her child, her story, her voice. Pause. This is the core lesson. Not that suffering is necessary, but that clarity often arrives when illusion is stripped away. Joanne Rowling didn't succeed because she believed harder. She succeeded because when belief failed, she still showed up. She wrote without applause. She endured without certainty. She stayed present when the future offered no promises. That is not glamour. That is gravity. And gravity builds things that last. So if you are listening to this from a place of exhaustion, if your effort feels invisible, if your hope feels thin, understand this. Despair does not disqualify you. Silence does not erase you. Being behind does not mean you are finished. It only means your story is still forming. And sometimes the part that hurts the most is the part that gives the work its weight. Long pause. Breathe. Because this wasn't a fairy tale. It was a survival story that became a legacy. And those are built slowly, in rooms no one applauds. Before we end this story, I want you to stay here for a moment. Not with her success, not with the numbers, not with the legacy. Stay with the version of her that no one quotes. The woman sitting alone in a cafe with a sleeping child beside her. The woman calculating coins before ordering a cup of coffee. The woman writing without witnesses, without guarantees, without belief in a happy ending. That woman matters more than the billionaire author history remembers, because she wrote when no one was watching. She continued when stopping would have made sense. She stayed alive when her mind argued otherwise. We often misunderstand despair. We think it disqualifies us. We assume it signals weakness. We treat it as a verdict, but despair is not a conclusion. It is information. It tells you what no longer works. It strips away illusions. It leaves you with essentials. For Joanne Rowling, despair removed everything unnecessary: status, approval, expectation. What remained was simple: a child to protect, a story to finish, a self that refused to disappear. She didn't turn pain into power overnight. She let pain narrow her focus, and that focus changed everything. Here is something important. She did not succeed because she was special. She succeeded because when life reduced her options, she chose the one thing that still felt honest: writing. Not because it promised escape, because it preserved identity. If you are listening right now from a place of uncertainty, if your life feels smaller than it used to, if the future looks unconvincing, I want you to understand this. You do not need confidence to continue. You do not need clarity to proceed. You do not need hope to take the next step. You only need refusal. Refusal to abandon the one thing that still feels true. That thing might not save you immediately. It might not impress anyone. It might not even work, but it will keep you intact. And intact people can rebuild. Joanne Rowling didn't write Harry Potter to become successful. She wrote it to remain herself. Success came later. Meaning came first. Long pause. So don't ask yourself when things will improve. Ask yourself what part of you is still alive. Protect that. Work on that. Return to that even when everything else feels unstable. Because stories like this are not about luck. They are about staying. Staying long enough for effort to compound. Staying long enough for rejection to lose authority. Staying long enough for despair to transform into direction. And if today all you can do is survive, that is enough. Survival is not failure. It is preparation.